There must have been some point, almost 30 years ago now, when Teddy Hart looked like a sure thing. A part of one of the great wrestling families, nephew of Bret and Owen Hart, grandchild of Stu, and still one of the youngest wrestlers to ever sign a WWE developmental contract at the age of just 18. And, well, he managed to blow the lot for no other reason, really, than simply being an unmitigated idiot who's had attitude problems just about everywhere, has had endless troubles with the law, makes the most outlandish and ludicrous claims about his career, and for whom in-ring action consists of nothing but doing the craziest things possible in order to get himself over, regardless of how stupid it may be and how it may affect anyone else in the ring. He's pretty wild, to say the least. To listen to him talk, he should be someone with the same status as The Rock or John Cena. And that's not just chucking in names out of thin air, that's literally people who he's compared himself to. In Teddy's world, basically none of his contemporaries were fit to lick his boots, and he'd be right up at the very top of the whole of the entertainment world, let alone wrestling, if it weren't for various things getting in the way that shockingly aren't himself. Whether it's his Uncle Bret punching Vince, people not covering for him, various wacky theories he believes in, or people simply not being on his level and getting his vision for what pro wrestling should be. Obviously there's no end of Teddy Hart antics I could get into. This could be one massive list, an iceberg that runs almost as deep and as dark as the Mariana Trench. However, I want to focus on one particular incident because I think that it is, unquestionably, the definitive in-ring example of Teddy Hart's prickishness, his terrible attitude, and why he never managed to get anywhere close to the career that, considering his pedigree, he should have had. It is of course that one big match from Ring of Honor in 2003, the main event spectacle's Scramble Cage match between Teddy and Jack Evans, the Backseat Boys, the Spanish announce team, Special K and the Carnage Crew. Sure, it's certainly a match that from the outset screams spotfest, one where there's not going to be even the slightest scintilla of psychology and the flippy dial is going to be turned all the way up to 11. And from bell to bell the match absolutely delivers on that. However, one person in the match would end up taking things just a little bit too far, and you don't need me to tell you who that is. So how did Teddy Hart screw things up so hard in just one night to a point where he was utterly shunned from a company, bags chucked out into the street and all, to a point where he had one of the all-time legendary wrestling screeds written about him? Well, let's get into it and head back to late 2003 to see just how it all went down. Then back up a cage, and then right back down again. And again and again and again. So, a quick summary before we get into the bout itself. Teddy Hart had been on the indie scene since his initial WWE developmental contract ended because of, can you guess? Yeah, attitude problems. Whether it was getting dropped from Dory Funk's Wrestling Academy back in 1998, or apparently going wild in hotel rooms, it eventually got to a point where officials simply decided he wasn't mature enough for the road and they'd just had enough of him. He made his debut with ROH in late September of 2003, beating TJ Wilson, better known as Tyson Kidd, and his involvement in the upcoming Big Cage Scramble is set up by Special K, the big group of ravers, mocking him backstage and saying that he's no high flyer, which naturally results in Teddy attacking the rich kids later on. And so he's going to take part in the big match, teaming up with Jack Evans. Other than that, there's not exactly a whole lot of major story going into this one, although there's certainly a fair bit of rivalry. You've got the Backseat Boys and the Spanish announce team who've taken on each other a hell of a lot, and the Carnage Crew have a pretty long-standing beef with Special K, seeing as they're such polar opposites. As an aside, Teddy Hart, Jack Evans and TJ Wilson all wrestled in Bruce Hart's incredibly short-lived 2001 promotion, Mat Rats, a show that was based entirely around young junior wrestlers and had a fair bit of investment put into it, but never got off the ground for various reasons. Mat Rats is perhaps a story for another day, but the main reason I mention it is because one of the company's unique ideas was having platforms on the top turnbuckle to make it easier for the wrestlers to do big athletic moves, and ROH are actually going to do this in the Scramble Cage. There's platforms on the top of the cage as corners, so the guys involved have a lot more footing for their flips. So, let's go to the match. As mentioned, we've got Hart and Evans, and they're up against Trent Acid and Johnny Cashmere, who are the Backseat Boys, the Carnage crew consisting of HC Loke and Tony DeVito, the Spanish announce team of Jose and Joel Maximo, and Angel Dust and Hydro from Special K, who are better known as Azrael and Jay Lethal respectively. The match starts with Hart, Evans and the Backseat Boys, and then the other entries are staggered to be 2 minutes apart, with pinfalls not counting until all 5 teams are in. From bell to bell, the big old spot fest goes off without a hitch. You should know exactly what to expect from this going in, and if you're not into the old flippy shit, then you may as well look away now. It's the sort of bout where there's so much wild stuff happening and there's so many big moves that it's damn near impossible to do a play-by-play of it all, but it does all come off very nicely. We've got 14 minutes of absolute high-wire action, and there's no botchers, so there is no doubt that these teams are pretty frickin' adept at what they do. Of course, one team does provide an exception to the flippy antics, and that's the Carnage crew. Loke and DeVito sure as hell aren't going to be using those platforms, but they're most certainly going to be up for a brawl, and they provide a nice contrast to the other 4 teams. And as you can imagine, there's going to be a bit of claret with this team involved. Things get even more chaotic when Angel Dust and Hydro come in because, as was often the case, all of Special K come with them, a big stable of rich kid ravers, all here to cause trouble. And yet the match doesn't fall apart at all, even with so much happening on the inside and outside. Happily, the big platforms don't get overused. In the end, they're a big part of 3 spots, all of which come off perfectly. First off, Hart and Evans, after a period of downtime on the outside, use it to get back in the match big style. Teddy Hurricane Rana's Evans off the platform and onto the SATs. This is nice, and it also coincides with Special K's arrival, meaning they use it to try and get a quick sneaky pin, although they don't succeed in doing so. Special K end up taking the brunt of the other big spots. Hydro and Joel Maximo end up duking it out on top of a platform, both teasing big moves, but eventually Jose gets up there to help his brother out, and they end up hitting a massive Spanish fly on Hydro, also landing on Evans, Angel Dust and the Carnage crew. That's outrageous enough, but the big moment belongs to Hart and Evans. With the rest of Special K still causing no end of trouble and running interference, they somehow need to all be taken out. And that happens when both Teddy Hart and Jack Evans get on the same platform. First up, Teddy Hart executes a massive Phoenix splash from the top of the cage to the frickin' floor, and then, just as the Ravers are recovering, well, not to be outdone, Evans executes one of the most dangerous moves of them all, a frickin' double moonsault, from the platform to the floor. This is obviously the big move of the whole match, even if the bout's filled with them. A double moonsault is a rare thing, an extremely risky thing. Evans executes it perfectly, and he's well caught. Obviously the crowd lose their minds, and with so many folks taken out of the equation, this leads into the finish of the match. The legal members of Special K are still in the ring, and Carnage crew blast Angel Dust with belts before hitting him with their finisher, the Spike Piledriver. However, the Backseat Boys are still kicking around. They interrupt the pin, take the crowd with kicks, and then they wreck Hydro with their frickin' awesome finisher, the T-Gimmick, to get the pin and win the match in an utterly adrenaline-pumping 14 minutes 15 seconds. If you like spot fests, then you should definitely watch this one, as it's a bloody fine example of the form. And if this were it, if all went exactly as it does on the tape and nothing else happened, we'd be talking about a match where all 5 teams really had their time to shine, although Hart and Evans absolutely shined the most. They had the biggest spots, they were in for the whole duration, and they nailed everything. They shredded the labooba out of it, as the kids might say. With this being Teddy Hart's second ROH match and Jack Evans' ROH debut, this match should have been a whopper of an introduction for them to the company, establishing them as a big force in the tag team division. Unfortunately, a certain idiot decided to go ahead and screw things up completely. As you might expect, the immediate aftermath of the Scramble Cage match was edited out of the Main Event Spectacles DVD. It was, however, included on ROH's Uncensored Volume 1 DVD. Now, as you might expect, it's not easy to come by, being that it's on an indie promotion's quite obscure DVD that's long out of print, and I honestly feared that footage of the incident had basically been scrubbed from the web. However, an internet wrestling legend came through for me, and I've got it here. And so, a massive thank you to the almighty Matthew of Botchamania for providing the footage in question. Anywho, here's what happened. With the match over, and not telling anyone that he was going to do this, Teddy Hart sneaked back into the cage, climbed up to the top of a platform, and did a freaking shooting star press off the cage onto the Special K guys, who weren't expecting it at all, and frankly, it looks nasty as hell, with Hart's legs smashing into angel dust. Carnage Crew immediately went on the attack, hitting Teddy with stiff moves and doing a bit of a beatdown on others with the belt, and you can hear someone shout, "Get him out of here!" At this stage, Loke and DeVito are probably trying to make this look as though it's part of the match, but, well, Teddy Hart is Teddy Hart. You can hear someone else shout, "Piece of shit!" although I'm not quite sure who it was and if it was directed at Teddy or not. Anywho, with Carnage Crew distracted, Teddy gets up, goes up to another cage platform, and frickin' dives like a ragdoll to the floor onto the SATs, who somehow managed to catch him despite this not being planned, and Teddy seemingly just doing God only knows what move, to be honest. This is outrageous, utterly dangerous, and kind of darkly hilarious in one respect. It's almost as if Teddy Hart's sneaking around, playing possum and then getting up to do these flips when the big, mean and nasty Carnage Crew aren't looking. Almost like HC Loke and Tony DeVito are the wrestling version of frickin' Mr. Snodworthy, long-suffering teachers trying in vain to stop Teddy the Menace from getting up to no good. The crew in particular were absolutely raging at this point, and DeVito hits a couple more belt shots on Teddy. It is all messy as hell, to say the least. DeVito gets told to go to the back, and he does, but even after all this, it's still not over. Teddy is suddenly up like nothing's happened, trying to get the crowd's love, and then he goes up top again and backflips into the ring, as a way of celebrating. He then does this again. Both Trent Acid and Jack Evans have tried to celebrate with Teddy, perhaps more as a way to get him to go to the back more than anything else, but Teddy will not be denied, and guess what? He backflips into the ring again, all while Rob Feinstein is out there trying to hold the Carnage Crew back from rushing the ring and doing Teddy an extreme physical discourtesy. Teddy seemingly wants to go up yet again, and having done all these outrageous flips in the post-match, not to mention all that he did in the match, he doesn't feel so good. He spews in the ring. Several times. After this, he finally frickin' leaves the arena. Or at least it looks like he does, but he's still stopping and calling for more cheers. The footage ends with frickin' Gabe Sapolsky coming out and subtly telling Teddy Hart to get the hell to the back already. So, yeah. As you can expect, a lot of folks in the back wanted to beat the hell out of Teddy Hart once he got there, but this didn't end up happening as such. Specifically, Samoa Joe was as mad as a lorry, and a bunch of people kinda needed to hold him back and call him off. You can understand why Joe was so hot, not just because of what Teddy did, but because Samoa Joe was on straight after the Scramble Cage, and now he's going to have to wrestle in a ring that was pockmarked with Teddy Hart's puke. Gabe went absolutely hellfire at Teddy, and you may be surprised at just who calmed Gabe down and gave a more constructive speech to the guy. Frickin' Jim Cornette, of all people, who's also talked about this on his podcast years ago, and mentions how he had to help try and stop Joe from wringing Teddy's neck. Cornette tried to explain to Teddy, patiently and reasonably, just what was wrong with what he did, how he really shouldn't try and upstage the other folks in the match in such a way. And after this speech, well, what did Teddy Hart have to say? Well, he said that just like in WWE, folks were simply jealous of what he could do, and that he couldn't believe Gabe Sapolsky wouldn't pat him on the back for what he did in the match. Not long after this, Teddy got the old heave-ho from the locker room, bags and all. Only Rob Feinstein seemed to stick around him, ostensibly to protect Teddy from anyone who was looking to find him and, have a more forceful discussion. It should be noted that Teddy Hart had a bit of previous in this department. Just a couple of months before, he took part in NWA TNA's X Cup and had a match on August 27th against Juventud Guerrera. The match was perfectly good, and while it apparently featured a few too many big kickouts for the taste of some folks in the back, it was Hoovy who called them. The main issue happened after Teddy got pinned following a Hoovy driver from the middle rope. Instead of selling the move post-match, Teddy instead did a hawk, blip, got straight back up, bowing and looking for people's applause, and did a backflip off the ropes. This did not exactly go down well at all, with Teddy saying that, well, he was just playing to the crowd, and he also got called out for doing AJ Styles' spiral tap in the match, to which his reply was that, well, he'd invented the move, which he called the open heart surgery. In any case, while the match was good, there wasn't a lot of appetite in TNA for flying Teddy back in again from Calgary, and the ROH incident, well, that was 10 times worse. After the show, Teddy tried to explain to Gabe and Feinstein that he'd suffered a concussion during the match and that, when he gets a concussion, he starts to do backflips, and he couldn't remember anything about what he did. They didn't buy this at all because, well, they couldn't feel a lump on his head when Teddy told them to check one out, and he hadn't shown any signs whatsoever of having a concussion during the match. Teddy's concussion apparently occurred quite early on, pretty much the whole fin had been laid out from spot to spot, and Teddy Hart hadn't missed a single one, nor did he have any glassy eyes or any other signs. Amusingly, the commentary for the match features a line from Gabe in his Jimmy Bauer commentary persona, both selling Jack Evans potentially having a concussion, and making sure to say that Teddy Hart didn't look like he had a concussion. I find that quite amusing, especially seeing as the commentary on Lee's early ROH shows was all done in post. Speaking of Jack Evans, it should be clarified that there was absolutely no heat on him whatsoever. Evans had impressed everyone with how he'd performed in the match, he didn't take any part in Teddy's post-match shenanigans, and he certainly hadn't encouraged them. That was undoubtedly all Teddy Hart's doing. The fallout would continue in the days and weeks following the bout, with several people, including Teddy himself, putting out their side of the story. Teddy Hart's story changed somewhat. In an interview for the internet radio show Get in the Ring, he went on the offensive, saying that after the match he didn't think he'd showed his best, and so that's why he went back in the ring to do all sorts of crap. Again, this was after previously saying that he'd had a concussion and couldn't remember any of it. He said as well that the post-match moves, including the shooting star of the cage, were done as a tribute to Owen Hart. He again reiterated that he thought people in ROH were jealous of what he could do, particularly singling out Steve Corino and AJ Styles, who apparently gave Teddy a list of moves that he couldn't do. Anything else? Well, he said that anyone who tried to blackball Teddy or stop him from giving 100% out there was, again, jealous because they're older than him and don't have his athleticism or creativity, and that these naysayers simply fuel his fire. God gave Teddy Hart the ability to perform moonsaults off of 30-foot cages, and no, ROH's cage was nowhere close to 30 feet tall, it was more like 15, and if God wills Teddy Hart to do those moonsaults and make it to the WWE, then so be it. How did people respond to this? Well, Gabe Sapolsky thought that there was surely no way in hell he could ever book Teddy Hart in ROH again, and that if he did, he would completely lose the respect he had in the locker room, as his attitude sucked that much. While AJ Styles didn't make any comment on it, a couple of wrestlers with internet presences most certainly did. And first up we've got Steve Corino, who wrote a rather firm rebuttal to Teddy on his website. Corino said that Teddy Hart may be one of the bigger assholes that he's come across in his almost 10 years in wrestling, and tries to give him a lesson about courtesy. With regards to Teddy's complaints about AJ Styles asking him not to do the spiral tap, it's simply about AJ Styles not just being higher up in the company, but actually being the champion, which he was in TNA when Teddy did it back in his X Cup match with Hoovy. It's basic stuff. You don't use the signature moves of someone who's the champ and is going to be using said move later on in the night, do ya? Even if you apparently invented it. Corino said that, being a Hart, you thought that Teddy would know better, but he doesn't. As far as the Scramble Cage goes, Corino's post said that rather than trying to get Teddy Hart beat on, his main role was in making sure Samoa Joe didn't rip his head off, and that he wasn't surprised by the whole thing. Having already seen him screw up in 1998 back at Dory Funk's dojo, he was mainly surprised that it took Teddy Hart 2 shows to screw the whole ROH thing up, as he figured that he would simply piss everyone off on his first night. Corino closes by saying that he hopes that Teddy Hart changes for the better, but he's not going to hold his breath for it. Happily, I was able to read this old Corino rant thanks to an ancient online World of Wrestling column by Mark Rose, which quotes the whole thing. And while a lot of stuff on the internet from this time does unfortunately tend to disappear, happily OWW is still kicking around, as is another ancient place, LiveJournal. Because LiveJournal still exists, we can go directly to the source of a rant that makes even Corino's rebuttal to Teddy Hart look positively cloying by comparison. Oh yeah, it's time for Punk. CM Punk's LiveJournal hasn't seen a post in 20 years, but it's still online and still has his legendary Teddy Hart post where he goes through his aforementioned appearance on Get in the Ring and roasts the living hell out of every bit of it. Punk hits a few of the same beats as Corino does with regards to AJ Styles and what have you, but there's a lot more juicy details and thoroughly quotable lines. He says how Teddy and his dad called the ROH office 17 times to say that he had no recollection of the match, only for Teddy to kind of wreck that by saying on one call that he'd missed a flight because he was stuck in traffic, at the same time that his dad was trying to explain that his concussion meant that he wasn't able to fly. So, whoops. His dad also tried to sell Teddy Hart as the next Brian Pillman, to which Punk responded, Brian Pillman as the loose cannon worked because it was believable that he could hurt somebody. You, my sad little friend, just annoy the shit out of people. Punk is, as you may expect, incredulous and furious about Hart calling his antics a tribute to Owen, and says that the best tribute Teddy could do to the Rocket would be to sell his boots on eBay. He says that the main reason why he's responding is because of how much danger he put the guys that he did uncalled dives on in, because they had no clue it was coming, and that the business is dangerous enough without kids like Teddy Hart putting anyone in harm's way more than they already are. On the AJ Styles thing, Punk says that backstage after that match with Hoovy, he tried to explain Wrestling 101 to Teddy, as no doubt many others have done, to say why he shouldn't have done it, and all Hart could do was just give him a blank stare and say, I invented that. Punk wonders if he invented being stupid too, amongst other invectives. When Teddy says that the fans were cheering his name and egging him on, Punk responds by saying he was there and the fans certainly weren't chanting, please climb to the top of the cage and do 3 unplanned spots putting everybody who has to break kayfabe and run to catch you in harm's way. As he says, it's a catchy chant, but it didn't happen. Indeed, as far as the chants go, well, while the crowd did chant Teddy's name at first, it does notably start to turn a little when he continues to backflip into the ring, and especially when he upchucks his cracker barrel. They don't boo, but it's just awkward. Like when a loud drunk guy tells a joke for the 5th time that night, as if it's the first time he's thought of it, and you kind of don't know how to react, so you just smile and try to force a laugh and hope he doesn't get aggressive. On people being jealous of Teddy due to his young age, Punk points out that American Dragon Bryan Danielson is actually a year younger than Teddy Hart, and that no one is jealous of Teddy because the only standards he sets is as a creepy little no-selling troll who wears sunglasses indoors and changes his outfit 4 times before a show. In closing, Punk says that he hopes Hart enjoys the extra press he's given him, but that he'd bet his life that he would find a way to ruin it with his out-of-control ego and piss-poor attitude. There's no conspiracy, and no one is trying to blackball Teddy Hart. They're just looking out for the safety of themselves and their friends, and for the product because they want to give the fans a good show. They're policing the locker room from a cancer that has no business in a business that he acts like he knows all about, but knows so little. So yeah, 2003 CM Punk, just as nowadays, most certainly has a fine way with words, with the added bonus of the language back then being just so much spicier. It's a shame that he hasn't posted to the LiveJournal in so long. if you're watching this, Punk, as meagre a chance it is that you would be, I really think you need to give us an update. Let everyone know what's been going on. Of course, the big rebuttals from Steve Corino and CM Punk certainly weren't enough to wrap this whole thing up, and they certainly weren't enough to get Teddy Hart to close his mouth. There's even a point in the days after the incident where a fan at a Stampede Wrestling show was heckling Teddy about what happened, Hart got in his face, and the fan frickin' spat on him, at which point Teddy Hart cracked the fan in the chops. So yeah, emotions ran pretty hot about it all, and obviously it wasn't too long before Teddy Hart was talking about it on another wrestling show on internet radio. This time it was the Interactive Interview, and I have again got an old OWW column from Mark Rose to thank for recapping it. I also have this column to thank for another amusing, old if kind of unrelated detail, in which Teddy Hart listed the shorts that he wore in his NWA TNA appearance against Hoovy on eBay. The starting price? $1,000. $1,000 for a pair of Teddy Hart's sweaty old wrestling shorts? Oh, jeez. I sure hope everyone didn't batter down the door all at once. Yet, shockingly no one bid on the auction. Anywho, I digress. Let's try and break down Teddy Hart's rebuttal to the rebuttals. He goes back to saying that he has no recollection of anything, thanks to his concussion, but he specifically says that Joel Maximo dropped him on his head, causing it. He blames the boys in the back for changing people's opinions about what happened when instead they should be putting over Teddy Hart doing a shooting star press off a cage into the ring, which hadn't been done before. He goes into extra backstage detail, insulting a girl who was with Steve Corino and saying that a friend of his got into an altercation with Samoa Joe, also calling Corino a jabroni who stunk in Dory Funk's dojo and is worse now. And as for CM Punk, well, Teddy goes full Sergeant Slaughter and changes his name to CM Puke, going so far as to question the veracity of his straight-edge lifestyle. He said that Punk didn't say anything to Teddy Hart because he was too busy trying to score pot backstage, and that it was flattering that Punk cared enough to spend so much time writing a 4-page essay on him. He also calls Corino and Punk panhandling bums who need to hit the gym and quit hitting the McDonald's, and I should also mention at this point that several times in this interview, Teddy Hart says that he's above shit-talking. So anyway, he ends up saying that Corino and CM Punk are welcome to come to Calgary for a shoot fight, and Rob Feinstein is welcome to come and film it. In summary, there's been quite a lot of words about all of this, particularly from Teddy Hart. They're not exactly good words, and they're often rather conflicting words, but they are unquestionably words. But how about actions? Was there any more physical fallouts from all this, online shit-talking and promo cutting? Oh yeah, there most certainly was. After all, it's rare for the doors in professional wrestling to be fully closed. Teddy Hart was still getting plenty of bookings, and a few months later old NWA TNA were interested in bringing him in again. Sleazy? Perhaps, but then we should remember that it is still only early 2004 in the Teddy Hart timeline. The guy is obviously still young, and there were still a lot of people who thought that if somehow he could get his attitude right, whether through the help of himself or through the nurturing of others, he could end up working out somewhere. If he was able to hone the talent and ditch all the crap behaviour, he would potentially have a pretty high ceiling. And in fact, TNA weren't the only promotion interested in bringing Teddy Hart back. Yes, it's March 2004, only a few months after the big Scramble Cage debacle, and Teddy Hart got booked to work Ring of Honor again, despite all the drama, the puking, the bags chucked out the building and everything. So, well, what happened? Why did things cool down so relatively quickly? Well, it's not as if people and companies were on an island in the Indies. It wasn't exactly long before people like, say, AJ Styles and Teddy Hart worked together again on a show, and these things passed without incident to the point where in February 2004, there were reports that perhaps ROH had cooled down their stance on the old Ted star. Perhaps Dave Penza, who was Hart's manager at the time, helped on that front. And sure enough, Teddy Hart would end up booked on the March 13th show in a big old 6-man mayhem match. There were reports that Hart and Penza wanted to work some sort of loose cannon type angle in which Teddy Hart bought a ticket to the show and got in that way, although Gabe Sapolsky decided against doing anything like that. It should also be mentioned that this show was in the same arena in which the Scramble Cage match took place. As far as TNA goes, Teddy Hart was booked for the company's next X-Cup tournament, which would be taking place in March. Now this seems innocuous enough, but there is one little thing to add to the equation, that being CM Punk also working TNA at this time. Sure enough, the pair would get into it big style. It started in a place called the White Trash Cafe at the Nashville Fairgrounds, and yes, that was its actual name, where Punk was eating with Petey Williams. Teddy Hart came in there and the pair exchanged words, at which point they agreed to settle it outside. It seems as though Punk fired the first slap, Hart responded with a right, they scuffled and ended up on the ground with Hart on top, but then the fight was broken up by, Sabu, who apparently got an accidental kick in the nuts from Teddy. 'Cause yeah, of course Sabu broke up the fight. In the world of Teddy Hart, Sabu breaking up his fight is perhaps the only thing that makes a lick of sense. In the end, both of them were called to a meeting with Don Harris where they got the old no chairs and no biscuits treatment, and told in no uncertain terms that any repeats of the incident would see them out on their arse. It is a little hazy, in all honesty, but reports range from there either being no clear winner in the fight to Teddy Hart getting the better of the skirmish, and shockingly, not all reports of the latter come from the mouth of Teddy Hart. Although of course he's commented saying that he dominated the brawl and that he could also last a couple of rounds with any UFC fighter and so on. That said, multiple accounts do have Teddy Hart as the winner of the fight, and he did have legit boxing training. In the end, it's the sort of thing that perhaps didn't reflect all that well on either Punk or Teddy Hart, particularly at the time, although you could probably argue that Punk got it worse, as much as any of this crap matters. After all, Teddy Hart already had a terrible reputation going into this and it couldn't sink much lower, whereas Punk did not, although this didn't ruin his rep or anything. Actually, some people were wondering if the whole thing was actually just a work-shoot type dealie, although if it was then it wouldn't have ended up being in TNA. Teddy Hart apparently suffered a knee injury following his X-Cup matches, and between this and the Punk incident, he wouldn't end up getting booked by TNA again. CM Punk's time in TNA would also end at this time, although that was for wholly different reasons that we will touch on in a little bit. What about the ROH side of things? Well, one of the reasons why some people believe that what happened between CM Punk and Teddy Hart was a work was because that from the looks of things, one of the reasons why Hart had been brought back into the ROH fold was for a feud with Steve Corino that would be a bit work-shooty and result in an empty arena match. It seemed as though Hart and Corino had worked out their differences a bit, or at least they'd worked it out enough to potentially do a bit of business together, which is a natural thing for the kin of old school to do, and people wondered if Teddy and CM Punk had worked out a similar deal. However, none of the planned Teddy Hart and Steve Corino stuff ended up happening, and in fact the reasons why they didn't happen don't seem to have had much to do with Teddy Hart. Indeed, while he got a mixed response for his return at March 9th's At Our Best show, the match and post-match all passed without incident, although there was a little worked-shoot segment in the six-man mayhem bout calling back to it. Instead, it was more to do with the chaos that engulfed ROH at the time, thanks to Rob Feinstein getting caught in the big FBI sting operation aimed at, people who talk nonsense. After being caught on TV with a glazed and thoroughly exposed look in his eyes as he ran back to his Lexus, it was quickly announced that ROH had severed all ties with Feinstein and RF Video, although this obviously left ROH in a world of shit, especially with TNA pulling all their talent from ROH's shows, which is what led to the end of Punk's time in TNA as he decided to stick by Ring of Honor. As for the Teddy Hart and Steve Corino thing, that was initially a Rob Feinstein idea, and while it at first seemed like ROH was still thinking about going ahead with it, it didn't happen, and with the idea nixed, there wasn't much for Teddy to do in ROH, and he simply wasn't booked further. To be honest, with the future looking bleak as hell for the company until Doug Gentry bought the share that belonged to Feinstein and immediately sold it to Carrie Silkin, flying Teddy Hart in from Calgary to not really do a whole lot probably wasn't an ideal thing to do money-wise anyway. There is a little epilogue of sorts because, well, yes, Teddy Hart would work Ring of Honor just one more time, and we may as well see if any shenanigans happened there. We fast forward over 5 frickin' years for Teddy Hart's last ROH appearance, final battle on December 12, 2009 against old partner Jack Evans. The show itself was something of a big deal as, along with it being the company's usual big year-end supercard, it was their first live internet-only pay-per-view. 5 years on, everything's pretty much changed in ROH. Gabe Sapolsky's gone, just about everyone who Teddy Hart previously had beef with back in 2003 and 2004 are gone. It's a pretty different place, so it's not exactly a wild thing to see Teddy Hart get brought back again, even if it would only end up being for one night. There were, of course, some shenanigans involving the bout, although again, it's not something Teddy Hart can actually be blamed for. The initial plan was for Teddy Hart to team with Alex Kozlov against Jack Evans and Rocky Romero, but Hart and Evans were coming in from Mexico, where they'd been working for AAA, on the day of the show, and their flight ended up delayed by several hours. In the end, Hart and Evans did end up arriving in the middle of the show and working on the card, doing a quick 7-minute single spot fest against each other just before the main event, that was eventually won by Evans. And yeah, that's it. Not much drama or anything, really. This was Teddy Hart's last match in ROH, and it was actually also Jack Evans' last bout with the company. Both were with AAA at the time, and they made the decision to basically be full-time there. And that seemingly worked out fine. Well, it did for Jack Evans anyway. Teddy Hart acted like the same massive heat magnet as ever in AAA. Most of the wrestlers and the office couldn't stand him, especially because he kept going on that Uncle Brett was going to whisk him over to WWE any minute now so that he could join the Hart Dynasty stable. Eventually AAA suspended him indefinitely, and no actual reason was given, no specific incident pointed to. From this we can deduce that AAA diagnosed Teddy Hart with a severe case of vaginal irritants. Or in layman's terms, being an annoying c***. And so that wraps up this look at the rather infamous time when Teddy Hart jumped off a cage. Many, many times. Until he puked. As I said in the beginning, if we were to do a whole career look at Teddy Hart, well, this video could have certainly got a lot deeper, and in doing so, it would have certainly got a lot darker. But this is an incident that kind of sums up just how much of a pain in the arse he has generally been throughout the whole career. He takes part in a great match, and then he immediately screws it up. And this is a cycle that's repeated so many times. Right up until the late 2010s, it seemed like Teddy Hart would always end up getting another chance somewhere to see if this time things would be different. Considering how many chances he had, there must be something about him. And yet, it would never work out. He is undoubtedly amongst the biggest names in the whole history of the business who's never come close to achieving his full potential, and for all the wild claims that he makes in interviews both past and present, the blame for that is laid entirely at his feet. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and until the next time, bye for now.